Between Palm Sunday and the day after Easter, we're releasing a new video each day. The question for today's video is, what is the meaning of Palm Sunday? There's something heartbreaking about Palm Sunday. The crowd wasn't pretending. When they lined the road into Jerusalem, waving palm branches and shouting praise, they meant every word. This wasn't performance or manipulation. They really believed Jesus was the Messiah, the one who would restore Israel, overthrow their oppressors, and establish the kingdom they'd been praying for through generations of occupation and humiliation. They saw him riding toward the city, and something rose up in them, hope maybe, or desperation dressed up as hope. They laid down their cloaks, cut branches from the trees, and shouted the ancient words, "Hosanna! Save us now." And Jesus let them do that. He didn't stop them. He didn't correct their misunderstanding or clarify what kind of king he actually was. He just rode forward on a donkey and received their praise in silence because he knew what they were celebrating, and he knew it wasn't him. Not really. They were celebrating a version of him they'd constructed in their imaginations, a king shaped by their fears and frustrations, their legitimate grievances and understandable longing for liberation. And within a week, when Jesus refused to become that king, they would turn against him. This is the tragedy of Palm Sunday. The crowd's worship was real. Their disappointment would be real too. And both were rooted in the same fundamental misunderstanding. They wanted a Messiah who would defeat their enemies, not one who would lose to and then die for their enemies. They wanted power that looked like power, victory that looked like victory, a kingdom that would crush Rome and restore Israel's glory and prove once and for all that God was on their side. Jesus came offering something else entirely. He came on a donkey, which any first century Jew would have recognized as a deliberate echo of Zechariah's prophecy about a king who comes gentle and riding on a donkey. Not triumphant, not militant, gentle. But gentleness doesn't overthrow empires, at least not in ways the world recognizes. So when the moment came for Jesus to seize power, when he could have rallied an army, led a revolt, and claimed the throne everyone assumed he wanted, he didn't. He let himself be arrested instead, beaten, mocked, crucified. And the people who had celebrated him felt betrayed, not because they were fickle or cruel by nature, but because the king they expected and the king who showed up turned out to be two different people. If we're honest, we do the same thing. We want a Jesus who validates our tribe, advances our causes, champions our politics, and humiliates our enemies. We want a Christianity that wins in categories the culture understands: partisan influence, numerical growth, and cultural dominance. We want to be on the right side of history, the winning side, the side that doesn't have to lose or suffer or look weak. And when Jesus doesn't deliver that, when following him leads to sacrifice instead of success, when the kingdom advances through suffering servants rather than triumphant warriors, we feel the same confusion the Palm Sunday crowd felt. This isn't the king we signed up for. But here's what Palm Sunday reveals. We can sincerely worship Jesus and still completely misunderstand who he is and what he's doing in the world. We can wave our branches and sing our songs while building a kingdom in our heads and hearts that has nothing to do with the one he's actually establishing. The crowd praised Jesus loudly on Sunday and abandoned him by Friday, not because they stopped believing in God, but because Jesus didn't cooperate with their vision of what God was supposed to do. He wouldn't take up the sword. He wouldn't establish the throne. He wouldn't give them the victory they craved. Instead, he gave them a cross. And the cross looked like failure until the next Sunday morning revealed it as the opposite of failure. But that's still days away. On Palm Sunday, All we have is the gap between what people are celebrating and what's actually about to happen. Maybe the question isn't whether our worship is sincere. Maybe the question is whether we're worshiping the actual Jesus or a version of him that we've created to baptize our own idols and ambitions. Are we following the Christ who calls us to take up a cross, or one we've imagined who helps us avoid it? Are we celebrating the King who serves, or one who makes us popular and powerful? Are we praising the Jesus who humbles and empties himself, or a projection we've built to justify what we already want? Because the crowd in Jerusalem was absolutely sincere, and they were absolutely wrong about what they were praising. Jesus didn't come to give us what we want. He came to give us what we need. Even when we can't tell the difference, even when it feels like betrayal, even when the path he takes looks nothing like victory, he's still king, just not on our terms. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe we can't trust a king who only does what we expect. Maybe the kind of Messiah who simply fulfills our agenda isn't big enough to save us from ourselves. Jesus refused to be that king. He still does, which means Palm Sunday is an invitation to examine what we're actually celebrating when we worship him, to ask whether our hosannas are offered to the real Jesus or to a projection we've created in his image. The answer matters, because the crowd that praised him on Sunday was the same crowd that called for his crucifixion on Friday, not because they were terrible people, but because they wanted a king, and Jesus insisted on being the king, their king, and our king, the one we need, not the one we think we want.